Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and Founder T. Gary Young.
Are you ready? I thought we had convention once this year. Wow, this is very exciting. And it's interesting because I have these columns right here in front of me, so I'm seeing double. They said there was 1,200 people here, and I disagree. I see 4,800 people. So, and maybe that's because they're here in spirit. Anyway, because they wish they could be and couldn't. How many of you are happy to be here? All right, thank you. Well, it's going to be a great day. A great day. Tell me, what did you come here for? To learn. Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear, to learn. Oh, and I'm here to learn also. Do you know that so much of what I teach, I've learned from you? Because I get an email saying, Gary, you know what I discovered? And it's so rewarding because I share, and then you all go out and you start applying it, and then you email me back, or I get a letter or whatever, or I see you at convention or in a seminar, and you validate the things that I've seen but didn't have the validation for, and it's really exciting. So all of you that are here today are pioneers, and you're going to help take the discoveries from this week out into the field and validate the authenticity of what we talk about and what we do. And that becomes very exciting because before I started teaching Raindrop and before I discovered it and developed it into what it is, it didn't exist. And in fact, before I started using essential oils, no one in the world had ever used essential oils topically for treatment. It was used as a appeasing, fragrancing for relaxation, mixing 1 to 3 drops in a gallon of massage oil and then massaging the body. But as far as using oils in a therapeutic application to provoke a change in the mechanism of the human body, it had never been done. And that's been a interesting venture in discovering and learning the different ways to apply oils, and especially when I had the world behind me saying, you're wrong. You can't do this, you can't use that oil, you can't put them on topically, you can't do it without diluting them, and it still goes on, but not at the level it used to, thanks to Dr. David Stewart. Dave Stewart, where are you? Anyway, Dr. Stewart, thank you. The position that he took in the world, and especially when he published his book, Chemistry Made Simple for Garys, he set a real tone in putting it in place that what I had developed and what I teach was real and valid. And I thank him for doing that. And it helped all of us in Young Living. And as I mentioned last night, every single person in this room needs to have his book on their desk without fail. And I don't care if you have to not get a Christmas present for your husband or your wife this year. You get that book and make sure you read it, not just buy it, because yes, we do absorb things from osmosis, but it is more effective when you read it. And you may not understand it the first time through, and that's quite all right. But if you read it 6 or 7 times, you'll start to get it, and you'll start to understand it. To have a basic understanding of chemistry, just a little bit, so you can talk intelligently about it. And somebody asks you what a molecule is, and you can say a molecule is made up of isomers. Well, how many of you know what an isomer is? So that's why you need to read, why you need to learn, just simple things, and to understand the structure of an oil molecule. And if you can answer that question, what is an isomer, you're ahead of 99% of the people in the world. You know, this life, that's what we're here for. You know, in your owner's operator's manual, the author says, gain knowledge in all things. So take that serious and go to work and do that. I mean, you've got a lot of time on your hands, you know, to learn. And learning is power. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is freedom. It's really, really wonderful. So, as you're out there, how many of you plan on teaching what you're here to learn? Only a few of you. How many are here to teach what you learned? Okay, every hand should have gone up because that's what you're here for. You're here to become a teacher. Many of you are teachers already. How many of you know all there is to know about essential oils? You notice I didn't raise my hand either. And however, many of you in Young Living learn more in the first raindrop class than it took me 5 years to learn. And many of you, when you walk out of here today, will know more than what it took me 10 years to learn. Now, I shouldn't have really said that because that's saying two really profound things. Either I'm a real slow learner or I'm really thick-headed, which could be both. But keeping in mind, there were no Gary books, there was no EDR, there was no Dr. Stewart's book, there were no books in English about essential oils or how to apply them. All there were European books that were written about chemistry of essential oils, not application. When I took my first seminar at the Medical University of Geneva in 1985, 40 hours of class time with Dr. Dufour and Dr. Lapraz, speaking in French with an interpreter sitting here, interpreting simultaneously in English. And when I'd walk out of the class at the end of a 10-hour day, my head felt like it was in a 50-gallon drum and somebody was beating on it with a baseball bat. And it was all about chemistry. All about chemistry. And so all of my studies in Europe, in Egypt, in Turkey, all about chemistry. Turkey is where I went to learn about GC mass analysis, to learn how to test an oil, then learn how to interpret that. I went to France and I studied with Dr. Hervé Casabianca. I've had him in my laboratory 3 times in Utah. He was in Ecuador in May, giving me further training and setting up our GC there. And we are very excited to share with you that we just expanded our laboratory last week in Ecuador and added an MSD. We have the most sophisticated laboratory on the farm in Ecuador that exists in the entire South American country. Young Living. Okay? So when somebody says, oh yes, we test our oils, I just laugh and turn and walk away. No one in South or North America has a GC that is instrumentated or calibrated as ours is in Utah and in Ecuador. In Ecuador, my GC there has 2 columns, a polar and non-polar, 60-meter, 50-meter columns with a 0.50 micron film thickness and a 0.52 micron film thickness in the columns. There's not another instrument in all of North and South America that is calibrated as ours are. And so when somebody says, oh, but we test our oils, sure, with a 30-meter column, come on, we're not testing petrochemicals. And that's what you do with a 30-meter column, unless you want to just run a real quick one. And that's why we have one GC in Utah with just a 30-meter column, so we can run an oil really quick just to get the top notes that are flashed off to see if the percentage are within reasonable measures to determine if we want to go ahead and run it through the 50 and 60-meter columns and the mass spec to spend that time to look at it. Because if we see anything out of range in that 30-meter column, there's no point in spending the 2.5 to 2 hours and 45 minutes running it through the 60-meter, the 50-meter columns, or the MSD. And so we're able to analyze much more effectively and much more quickly. Most of you haven't met Dr. Cole Woolley, who heads up our laboratory in Utah. And some of you may not be aware, but Sue, who's been with me for over 15 years, retired last month. And she's working as a consultant. In fact, she's just returning from Poland after presenting one of my research papers in Poland this last week. And so she will be facilitating as a consultant, but she's taken retirement to be with her family, and she went to a lot of measures in helping me develop the laboratory and helping to develop the library, which we have probably one of the largest libraries in the United States for identifying essential oil compounds, with 280,000 plus references in our library that has taken us 14 years to build. So it's not a question, it's not even up for debate about knowing whether an oil is pure, cut, adulterated, synthetic, or counterpart of a nature identical compound. We know what we're talking about. And Dr. Cole Woolley, who worked for Algient for a number of years, and who is Algient? Algient is the company that builds GC mass specs. And Dr. Woolley, with his PhD in organic and biochemistry, worked there helping develop them. He knows them. He could take one apart, put it back together blindfolded. And of course spent his career doing analysis and study in organic and non-organic compounds. So we have a very, very powerful team. Dr. Casabianca naturally is a consultant to Young Living and works with us constantly, and we'll be returning to Ecuador to the lab there in November for another 2 weeks of update training for myself and my team there in running and analyzing a GC mass spec. And we're very excited about it because, again, it opens a door. And why? Because we're studying oils there that have never been developed, never been found, never been discovered in the world at this time. And so there are compounds there that no one has seen before. And it's a lot of work in identifying these compounds, and some of them we might not be able to identify because they're minute compounds with no identity at this time. But still, it's a great challenge. But what we do find, we find compounds that are very, very effective in the eradicating of different biological problems found in the human body. And we've been very excited because one of the oils that we've been working on this past year, we've run 3 sets of tests now, and it's most interesting, and that's the Ocotea oil. And why have we been running tests on it? Because when we use the Ocotea oil in the clinic on patients, we've seen one very, very specific response, and that is reducing hypertension and lowering blood pressure. I mean, it's almost instant. But so as we were running it through the lab and doing some studies with the university and identifying the compounds that were responsible for reducing hypertension, guess what we discovered? It was a very active agent in killing malaria. So we ran a full research study for 4 months to identify the effects of it killing malaria, and it worked. So we wanted to do a double-blind study. We ran it again, and it had no effect on killing malaria. Now, isn't that interesting? And why? Why did it work the first time? It didn't work the second time. So I backed up and I said, just a minute, we got to run this a third time. So we're still in that process now, 2 months running. We'll be another 2 months finishing it, but our third test is showing exactly the same results as the first one. So Dr. Leda, who is my liaison with the chemistry department at the university doing this research, she said to me, she says, Gary, why did it not work the second time? I said, because it was different Ocotea. So when we talk about oils, even an oil that is natural and completely from a natural source doesn't always mean it's going to work. And I've distilled Ocotea from 3 different regions in Ecuador. And 3 different Ocoteas coming from the same tree, but in 3 different regions, all produce different outcomes. And when you look at the chemistry of the 3 different oils, they all 3 have different structures. And so it's not a matter of just saying, oh, here's an oil, we're going to use it for this, and run with it. And yet that's how the world has been doing it. But Young Living doesn't do that. We go in and we source and we look for all the options. Like with Ocotea, with Palo Santo. I've distilled Palo Santo for 5 years now, looking and finally identifying the correct species and location of Palo Santo to get the highest level of what? D-limonene. To effect the reduction of inflammation and antibacterial, antiviral action. So it's a lot of work, and it's not something that you do in 5 minutes and you put it on the market. It's a lot of time involved, and it's a lot of work. And why do we do that? Why have we built a laboratory in Ecuador when we have a very adequate laboratory, very sophisticated laboratory, with over $1.5 million in equipment, probably closer to $2.5 million in equipment in our lab in Utah? So why did we build a second one? That financially doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And if you ask my accounting department, they would agree. The reason why is because when I'm distilling in Ecuador, I need to know what I have at that moment. I can't afford to wait for a 3 to 6 week turnaround time, sending it to Dr. Casabianca and sending it to Utah to get in the pipeline to go through and get a result back to me. Because when we're distilling, I like to pull samples during the distilling process and run upstairs to the lab and pop it in an hour and 30 minutes, I've got a result. And I can look at that and say, okay, stop the distillation, as we did a few weeks ago. Stop the distillation. We were distilling Ruta, and we ran the Ruta through from a sample, and I did. I told the distillery operator, Eugenio, and Chris, who's the manager, I said, stop the distillation, let the Ruta lay for another 3 days. We let the Ruta lay on the deck for another 3 days. We distilled it, pulled a sample, ran it, popped it in the GC, and ran it, and I said, now we can distill, because the daconone percentages is where I wanted to see them. And so what we learned from that is where we used to let Ruta lay on the deck for 3 days, now we let it lay on the deck for 6 days. And we doubled our production. We went from 3 and 4 liters in a single extraction process now to 8 to 9 liters in an extraction process. So not only did we double our production, but we also doubled the percentage of dacanones and tridacanones in the oil as well, and we went from 2% eudicimol to 5% eudicimol. And that's where the value is knowing where it needs to be for that particular time. So folks, when somebody comes along with an oil and says, oh, we've got the best oils in the world, I laugh. 1, especially when they don't know where the oil came from. 2, when they don't know how to distill. 3, when they don't know how to run a GC. And 4, when they don't know how to interpret what was put in front of them in the first place. And 5, especially if you said, what's the difference between an L-limonene and a D-limonene? And they go, and can you find those 2 compounds in the same oil? And is it natural if you do? And they go, I don't know. If you're going to be in this field, then you need to know. And if you're selling oils, it's your job to know. And I have made it my top priority in identifying what is real and what is not real, and what's pure and what's not pure. Because the oil comes from a plant and it's distilled at the right temperature and the right pressure and put in a bottle and it says therapeutic. Does that make it therapeutic because it says so on the label? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It depends on what the percentage of the compounds are inside that oil. So let's go to a little chemistry this morning. I know that this is your favorite subject. And if you find your brain stretched a little bit, then hallelujah. I love stretching my brain. And if you have a headache, then that's all the more better. It means that you're getting more stuff in there and it's expanding and it's having to make room, and that's what's causing the headache. Okay? So just rub a little peppermint on, breathe it, or brain power, or clarity, or whatever you have handy there to expand that brain. In fact, as you're learning, and what I love doing is keeping clarity and brain power beside me and just rub it under my nose when I'm learning, because you know what it does? It stimulates memory retention, and we need memory retention. Do you know what people miss the most that they lose in life after the age of 20? their mind. Okay? It used to be after the age of 80, but now it's after the age of 20. So what's changed? All the chemical saturation on the receptors in the brain. So we're going to look at some compounds here: carvacrol, thymol, methyl, and terpen-1,4-ol. And of course it's OL4, but we call it 4-ol. Okay. Now, as you notice, that the carvacrol and thymol are very similar in structure, but the oxygen-hydrogen molecules are just attached at a different location. But basically, the isomer structure is identical, but it has a very significant different fragrance. And you recognize that. Now, again, you look at methyl and you look at terpen-4-ol, and the isomer structure is very similar, but very different. And you start recognizing these compounds are very important to understand what's going on in chemistry and to help identify whether you're dealing with a natural molecule or a synthetic molecule. Eudicimol. Talked about this a little bit last night. We're going to talk about it a little bit more because this is very specific. What is eudicimol? It's a molecule that is found to help promote neurite growth. And what is the problem we have in our world today with mercury fillings in the teeth? What is mercury causing? Mercury in the vaccines. What is happening as a result of the vaccines? We've developed a condition called ADHD. Autism. Any type of brain dysfunction or deregulation of the brain or thought process or memory retention has exploded in the last 25 years, and largely in part because of the mercury in vaccines, mercury in fillings in the teeth, and in cookware that people cook with and other avenues. I mean, many people are soda pop drinkers. I know that there's 1,200 people here that don't drink soda pop, so it's not a concern for you. But maybe in your juvenile years you might have. So if you did, you could have consumed some mercury from soda pop. And so what does mercury do? It destroys the neurites in the brain. Eudicimol stimulates the regrowth of neurites. Extremely important. It helps and works in conjunction, particularly as eudicimol, and in this text, this comes out of my phytochemistry book, eudicimol was found in eucalyptus oil, but it's 5 times higher in ruta than in eucalyptus. And of course, when they wrote this book, they didn't know about ruta. And what's exciting about it, ruta with eudicimol is in companionship with daconone, undacanones, tridacanones, and daconone 2s. And these compounds modulate brain function for eradicating depression and increasing memory retention. And so what are we doing with ruta? We put these compounds together in the single family, and you've got an oil that enhances brain development. Brain development. And how many of our children need brain development? How many of the children's parents need brain development? Memory retention. Eradicating brain fatigue. How many in this room have experienced brain fatigue? Living in Ecuador, we experience it a great deal. Trying to understand the culture, understand the people, understand the mentality really taxes the brain. Okay, there's all different kinds of brain fatigue, but primarily, what is brain fatigue? How many of you have experienced brain fatigue, and maybe on a daily basis? Okay, brain fatigue originates from a disruption in the pituitary, and that disruption comes from chemicals. Second cause of brain fatigue is a disruption in the wall of the gut when candida proliferates the lining and causes what's referred to as leaky gut syndrome. And this causes a gas that goes to the brain and causes brain fatigue. Why? Because it robs the brain of oxygen. And it's another chemical disruptor. So there are many things that causes brain fatigue, and you've heard it referred to as brain fog. How many have heard the term brain fog? And how many of you have even said, God, I just feel so foggy? And, we say it, we use those terms loosely, we don't take into consideration it's a real thing. So how do we eliminate brain fog and brain fatigue? By cleaning up our lives, by cleaning up our diet, and understanding if we want to have a very powerful memory and a very powerful brain that can retain and articulate, then there are things that we need to do. And some of those things are learning to eliminate substances in our life that contribute to that. And sugar is one of the worst culprits that we can put into our bodies that interferes with brain function and hormonal function. So we see a lot of that. Now here we're looking at the C15s and H26Os on the eudicimol structure. And of course, if we want to know whether it's synthetic or natural, then we have to go into an optical refractometer and measure the compound to see what the action is. Now, again, it's really important to keep in mind, because we use the words very loosely, lateral rotary and dextrorotary, meaning that we've been taught that a right-hand spin is natural and a left-hand spin is not natural. And folks, those terms cannot be used that way in that terminology because it's not correct information. Because an essential oil can have both a dextrorotary and a lateral rotary action. A pure natural chemical. What makes the difference? Some compounds have what I call double chiral isomers. They're also referred to as chiral pairs, which is the same thing, isomers. And so you can have a lateral rotary and a dextrorotary in limonene, because lateral rotary limonene will come from citrus and dextrorotary limonene will come from evergreens, frankincense, palo santo. So, we really take terms sometimes and mix them up and confuse ourselves, and then we tell the story and confuse other people. And I, for one, years ago, heard this term, if it had a left-hand spin, then it was unnatural. Only the natural products that have a right-hand spin were healthy to the body. And folks, it's not true. You can mirror duplicate an L-limonene or a D-limonene in the laboratory. But as I mentioned to the group yesterday, what makes the difference is a synthetic will not match the receptor site that is designated specifically to receive an L-limonene or a D-limonene. So anyway, we're just going to go through this really quick. I just want to give you some foundation, and more than anything else, stimulate your thinking process and know that, and I don't know, Dr. Stewart, do we have your books here? I sent a request to have Dr. Stewart's books brought for the conference so you could buy them. And if not, then make sure that you get an order form or an address, an whatever, so you can order this book and do your homework. Very, very important. All right? Terpenoids are aromatic compounds found in essential oils are made from isoprene C5 or 5 carbon molecules. Now, this is a little bit too technical to get into, and so we're not going to spend time there. But what I want you to understand also is every molecule that we find here and we talk about here can be synthetically duplicated in the laboratory. And these are the families that we're going to primarily talk about. We did yesterday a little bit, polypropanoids and monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes. Because as we go through Raindrop, you're going to have a greater understanding that the majority of the oils that we're talking about in Raindrop fall in the classification of monoterpenes, phenols, and sesquiterpenes. And it's really important to understand these family groups so you can have a better understanding of when you're applying an oil, why you chose that oil to apply. For example, phenols, which come from the polyphenol family, polypropanoid family that we see right there in the top. And because of positioning, I'm not going to be able to be effective in pointing very well, but right here at the top. The phenylpropanoid families are the ones that are responsible for receptor site cleansing. They are detoxifiers of toxins in the body, whether it's environmental toxins, chemical toxins, food toxins, whatever creates a toxic substance in the body, phenols, which are part of the phenylpropanoids, are responsible for eradicating those poisons out of the body, for taking the microfilm off the receptor site that inhibits a molecule entering the receptor site. And that is extremely important. That's why I use oregano and thyme, the first two oils in Raindrop, oregano and thyme, because they're predominant phenols. Now what's beautiful about it is many of the oils will contain these three family groups in one single oil. So you can see a phenol predominant in an oil such as oregano, and then you can find sesquiterpenes also in that oil. And this makes it very powerful because what happens, the phenol goes in and opens the receptor site, and also phenols are stimulants. That's why when you put phenols on the skin, sometimes you'll get a discoloration or a rash, because they're very, very aggressive against the aggressive H plus ion, which is the aggressive part of the acid in your body. And it's the toxic part of the acid that becomes very, very strong in your body and creates rashes and allergies and reactions and acid burning and reflux and heartburn. All of those come from the aggressive H plus ion that is created in the overproduction of acid in the body. So do we eliminate all acid from the body? Of course we don't. We eliminate the aggressive toxic acids from the body. And phenols are very aggressive in going in, cannibalizing those, digesting them, and then disposing it through the elimination channels of the body. Your skin, thank God God gave us skin. We'd look pretty strange without it. But the skin is the largest detoxification organ that we have on our body, in our body, around our body is a better way of putting it. And of course, if we're not eliminating those toxins effectively and efficiently, fast enough, then it's going to come out through the skin. So through the next 3 days, as we start applying oils, some of you might see some blotching, some reddening on the spine or on the neck or the hands, the arms as you start applying oils. And I'm just warning you now, do not be alarmed, but be grateful, be thankful that this is happening, because what it's doing, it's going in, it's attacking the ion, the acid ions, breaking them up, dissolving them so they can be eliminated. Many of us, because of our lifestyles and what we've been subject to and where we've been, we take on a lot of dermal acids. And it upsets the acid mantle in the skin because we're in excess of those aggressive H plus ions. And when that happens, and then you start applying an oil, and it goes in and attacks those acids and starts digesting them, it comes to the surface in a very, very harsh rash as it's trying to eliminate it from your body. And so instead of you get scared and get upset and say, oh my goodness, I'm allergic to this oil, you need to thank God for that oil because it's getting rid of the poison that could be causing cancer or a lymphatic blockage, lipomas, granulomas, whatever in the body that happens as a result of that. So the same thing as you go back and you have an eruption on your skin, don't say, oh my goodness, I'm allergic to the oil. You know, the first thing you want to ask yourself, where did I get my oil? If you didn't get it from Young Living, then you might have a reason to get negative. Because you're probably dealing, you can almost guarantee 99.9% if you didn't get it from Young Living, you got an oil that is contaminated or distilled incorrectly, because that takes place all the time. I can't tell you how much oil in Ecuador the first 2 years of distillation that we poured on the ground. Because I'd never distilled oil in South America before. I'd certainly never distilled at sea level before, and I certainly never distilled south of the equator before. I'd never distilled plants in a climate where you had 96% humidity. In Utah, we have 6. In St. Mary's, we have 11. In France, we have 5. In Oman, we have 2. But to have 96% humidity, and you distill a plant, and the oil comes out, it's pure. It's a pure oil because we just took it from the plant, we put it in the distillery, we distilled it, and we got a pure oil. True or false? But when I run it through the GC and I see that my peppermint oil doesn't have the right percentages, my Ruta doesn't have the right percentage values in eudicimol and dacanones, my Ocotea doesn't have the right level of cinnamaldehyde in it, there's something wrong. The oregano, many of you have heard me tell the story. When I distilled oregano, I didn't even use it. In fact, the first batch of oregano, after we got the GC back from Utah, and I saw 32% Chavacol, I disposed of it. What was the point of keeping it? It didn't meet the standard. It wasn't good enough. It took me 3 years to discover that it was better. And I wanted to go and dig up the ground and distill the ground and get my oil back. But it doesn't work that way. And so it was learning. Just like I mentioned about Ruta, we went from laying it down for 3 days to laying it down for 6 days. Our Ocotea, when it comes in now, we let it lay on the deck for 7 days. Why? Because of the high humidity. What are we doing at the farm right now? We're building a whole nother canopy over the distillery pad. So we've got shade drying so we can lay it down for 7 days and not get the humidity effect on it. So we can get the moisture content. How did I know that? How did I discover that? Because all you do is pick up the oil and smell it. And you can smell the water in the oil. And we call it green. If you don't have a nose to know, then how are you going to know what the nose doesn't know? And how are you going to know if you don't know what the nose knows and you don't know what the nose knows? And did I learn all of that in 2 years? Or 4 years? Or 10 years? Or 15 years? Or 20 years? No. It's taken me 30 years. Now I know, Gary, you're not that old. Not until I start counting backwards. And as I mentioned to the group yesterday, my goodness gracious, I feel like I'm just starting to get to the threshold of my learning curve in essential oils. And it took me 30 years to get to the threshold. It might take me another 30 or 60 years to get over the threshold. And once I get through the door, I'll probably discover that I've got another 100 years in front of me. So how in the world can I look at retirement? Never in my life have I studied a field that has no boundaries or borders or end to it. And especially when we start looking at the single molecules. How many ways can we use eudicimol? How many ways will we find that we can use dacanone? How many different effects are they going to be on the body once we start studying? And that's why I get so excited, because there's 1,200 of you folks in this room that are my assistant chemist, my assistant practitioners that are going to go out there and apply and learn and send me an email and say, Gary, did you know this? Did you know I found this thing? This patient reacted this way? Oh my goodness, do you know that gallstones came out using Ruta? No. I mean, that's the value you all have in this big picture. And that's why I get so excited. And you understand now why I didn't sell my oils to a health food store. You're welcome. Because I wouldn't have a health food store owner or manager doing this research and helping to facilitate this for the work. I wouldn't have a Dr. David Stewart writing books if he's a health food store owner. I wouldn't have a Dr. Tom Reed lecturing to the health food store owners what he's found and discovered in his practice, and all the other doctors that have contributed so much to what has been the development and the growth of the discoveries in Young Living. And each and every one of you have made some phenomenal discoveries. Phenomenal discoveries. You know, I can't name all of the folks that have given me feedback of what little things that you found that you thought was incidental, but was monumental. in the overall picture, the change that you found. I mean, I don't even know really how to put it in words. The gratitude that I feel and the excitement that I feel every time I get a simple little testimony of Dr. Young, Gary, Mr. Young, whatever. I don't care what you call me as long as it's not late for lunch. But the point of it is the excitement that I get after all these years of still hearing your testimonials that you think are incidental. They're not incidental. They're grand to the big picture, because all of it just goes into my file of adding and adding and adding the repetition of, yes, it does work. Yes, this is real. So just, again, keep in mind as we go through the next 3 days, and keep your notebook at your side and start making notes of things that you see, things you didn't know, feelings that you have. How many of you have heard of a man called God? Okay? And his children wrote a book. I call it your owner's operator's manual. How many of you have an owner's operator's manual? Okay? You don't? He will speak to you. And I have been criticized in the past about talking about God and God talking to me, and I've been told that's blasphemy. God doesn't talk to you. Thank you. And sometimes I think that a lot of people get programmed differently because of things they've been taught through their childhood and things they've been raised with. But yes, God is your Father, and He will talk to you the same as your earthly parent will talk to you if you will talk to Him and develop a relationship and listen. So through this next 3 days, as you're working with that substance which He commissioned for the healing of man and commissioned for the opening of the pineal gland for communication, you're going to feel His presence. Okay? And through that, He will talk to you and He will direct you in how to do it. I stand here this day as a witness to knowing that as a fact. And so have your notebook there. So when you get this little feeling come in your mind, don't discard it. That feeling is there for a reason. Just write it down. And maybe it won't mean a whole lot to you at that moment. Maybe it'll take a week, a month, a year. One day the light bulb will turn on because you got the brain fog out of the way. And you see why you had that feeling, why that thought was there, why it provoked this feeling in your body. It's there. You know, unfortunately, we get so conditioned to believe that someone else in authority has to tell us about life and has to tell us how it should be and how we should live it. Go to the source and get your information. All right? And then you can spend the next 30 years trying to understand what it means. You know, I could not afford to wait till somebody discovered what I needed for me. But after I learned what I needed for me, then I spent time going back and trying to understand the mechanics of how it functioned and how it happened. And was it really important for me to know how mechanically? No. Why? Because it worked. So why did I want to spend time in learning about the mechanics of why? Because it's the only way I can teach you and share it with you. Okay. L-methone is a ketone. I mentioned that yesterday, but all of you were not there yesterday. I don't know why. But it's important to understand, again, that in each oil you can have isomers from monoterpenes, isomers from Sesquiterpenes, isomers from phenols, isomers from ketones. That's why essential oils are very complex and multifunctional. That's why they've been referred to as a global action. But people don't always understand that, because in chemistry, when a chemical molecule is made, it generally has 1 to 3 functions, and that's it. And most times that chemical has been manufactured because it is not buffered and balanced with other counterparts, becomes a very toxic substance, and because a chemical that is manufactured by man does not contain a consciousness. And it does not contain the knowing that God puts in his molecules. And so therefore, when it goes into the body and it goes to the receptor site, it doesn't have the right structure to get into that receptor. And so it sits on the outside, banging on the door, trying to get in, and every time it bangs on the door, it creates more inflammation and more toxicity that eventually will lead to some biological dysfunction in the human body. So when people say, well, I took a drug and it helped me, for how long? And what was the price you paid for it? Because then a little while later you had to go take another drug for the side effect of that drug. And we get programmed to believe that we have to. We had a lady sitting in our home just a few days ago that brought her 10-year-old daughter to me because she couldn't get any answers from the doctors. This 10-year-old girl has got lumps growing in her throat, in the side of her neck, in her hands, and they couldn't figure out. So what did the doctor do? He put her on steroids, a 10-year-old girl. And the lumps were just a simple lipoma under the skin, what you could get a hold, you could grab it and just move it around, and it was very soft, but to touch it, it was extremely painful, which is not typical of a standard lipoma. So what was going on with this 10-year-old girl? She was overweight. She couldn't metabolize properly. 10 years old, she was already developing because of a hormonal disruption and imbalance in her body. 10-year-old girl that as I stood and examined her body odor was offensive. Why would a 10-year-old girl have offensive body odor? Because her system was plugged. I said to the mother, I says, does she have problems with constipation? Yes, she's been constipated her whole life. Wasn't that the answer? Miss Mary was my personal interpreter. And I said in my next question to her, how many vaccines has she had? Well, she was vaccinated at birth while in the hospital, and she'd had 14 vaccines from birth to age 3 months. From birth to age 3 months, she'd had 14 vaccines. And the mother was taking drugs for the first 3 months or the last 3 months? First 3 months of pregnancy, the mother was put on 3 drugs or 4? 3 or 4 drugs in her first trimester of pregnancy because she said it was required by law that every woman in Ecuador who conceives and gets pregnant has to take these 3 prescribed drugs, which is not true. It is not a law, but that village claimed it was a law, and because these people are uneducated, didn't know any different, so they just took them. So here's a 10-year-old girl who's in the first stages of developing cancer, lymphatic cancer, and would probably be full-blown cancer by the time she's 15 to 18. If not sooner, because of her lifestyle. What do they eat? Fried food. And because money was difficult, and they couldn't afford to buy things, they cooked their food in grease, and then they put the grease on the pan on the back of the stove and reuse it at lunchtime, and then reuse it at dinner. Now, for some families that can eat 3 times a day, that's what they would do. But for most families, they only eat once a day, so the grease would sit on the pan on the stove until the next day, 24 hours later, when they ate the 1 meal a day again, cooked in the same grease they'd cooked in the day before, the week before, until the grease was all gone. And wonder why their lymphatic system is so plugged up. Okay? And thinking of what drugs do. And when they're uneducated, they don't know they have options, they don't know there can be something different. Folks, let me tell you that every one of us have used drugs at some time in our life. And I have to tell you that even though I get upset at the system, that it was a system that saved my life in 1973, but the system did not take me out of the wheelchair. So sometimes you're in a situation where you may need the doctor to put you back together like they did in my case, but then I had to go home and I had to create my own healing and my own recovery. And so don't be afraid to take responsibility. Don't be afraid to take charge of your life. And I'll tell you something, folks. In 1973, I did not know anything about health other than I grew up in a home where we didn't use sugar. And that was about the extent of my health knowledge. I had to learn. But where did I go? Because I didn't have people come and give me information. I didn't have anybody come and say, well, Gary, have you tried essential oils? Gary, have you tried this? Gary, have you tried that? No, I went on a mission to seek, search, find, ask, and knock. And every one of you can do the same thing. You know, what I'm saying here, folks, is if you want to have life and you want to have vitality, then take responsibility for it and make choices. And don't make choices based on fear. Because if you make choices based on fear, 99% of the time they'll be wrong. And you'll be back to square one trying to figure out what to do with your life again. Make choices on knowing because you got the right answers from the right source. Okay? Aldehydes, ketones. What are ketones? How many of you can tell me what a ketone is? Okay, I guess we better rewind the tape and start over. Ketones are your fragrance molecules. So when you smell an oil and you smell that fragrance, the base behind it are ketones. What are aldehydes? How many can tell me what an aldehyde is? This is the first level one that you've all been in. Aldehydes are calming agents. They work on against the sympathetic nervous system to reduce the sympathetic nervous system and to turn on the parasympathetic so the autonomic nervous system of the body can respond in a positive way. Aldehyde and esters are to support parasympathetic function and autoimmune response, auto nervous system response. Okay? What are phenols? Phenols are receptor site cleansers, detoxifiers, stimulants. Very, very important. Okay? Next, found in aniseed and fennel. This molecule has been found beneficial in helping modulate hormone function. Has an estrogen-like action. So when you start looking at the individual plant molecules, all of a sudden you can go in the space of saying, you know, maybe we really don't need to go get a synthetic estrogen. Bisabolol reduces anxiety, enhances relaxation. Why? Because it's a sesquiterpene found in chamomile oils predominantly. So when you mix chamomile oil, particularly German chamomile, with ruta, with lavender, what do you have? You have an oil that is very powerful in stimulating relaxation and compromising anxiety. But because of the sesquiterpene level found in chamomile, in ruta, in lavender, you also have a blend that is very powerful for the oxygen uptake to the brain and deregulating galactan-3 production from the pituitary gland. And so all of a sudden now it moves you in a space where you can function more adequately. And with what I presented yesterday about galactan-3, and we won't have time to go into that in these next 3 days, but galactan-3, when it goes into overproduction from the pituitary gland, it now within the last 6 months is last 3 years, but the last 6 months specifically has been now linked to depression, obesity, cancer, heart disease, and stroke. A new discovery in medicine. And what is so beautiful, sesquiterpenes dysregulates the overproduction of galactan-3s. So very important. So look at your chemistry and know that if you're looking for something that's going to reduce anxiety, that's going to compromise depression, then you're going to look for oils that contain sesquiterpene families that contain bisabolol. Okay? Bisabolol. You have to kind of, get your tongue a little sideways there. Beta-caryophyllene, another very, very interesting compound, also found in Ocotea. So, because I didn't have time to update my presentation here a second time, because I had it all updated and lost it on the airplane coming home. So, I had to have John go in and pull up the original file, and so right down there, Ocotea. But beta-caryophyllene is really, really powerful because it's an anti-inflammatory agent. And beta-caryophyllene and caryophyllene oxide also work as anti-cancer agents. And the caryophyllene oxide specific as an anti-tumor compound. And we see the percentages here of beta-caryophyllene in different oils. And of course, there you see lavender at the bottom is a very, very small percentage of 4%. Copal, Copaiba, which is our new oil that we brought on 2 years ago, and shows the highest level of beta-caryophyllene as an anti-inflammatory agent. But folks, what is very interesting is you can take a simple oil like lavender because it contains sesquiterpene, or you can take melissa or vetiver or cedarwood that contain high levels of sesquiterpene but has very, very to no level of beta-caryophyllene, and put that oil with copal or rosemary that's high in beta-caryophyllene, and you can actually increase the function of the beta-caryophyllene by adding a high percentage of sesquiterpene to it. And why does that happen? Because naturally, as you add a sesquiterpene oil that's high in sesquiterpenes, like even ginger, but I prefer melissa, vetiver, or cedarwood or valerian because they're less expensive and less irritant to the skin than ginger. Melissa's not less expensive than ginger, except for me. But since I grow it and produce it, I get a discount. But you take those oils and you put that with rosemary or copal, and all of a sudden you enhance the overall action of the beta-caryophyllene. Because oxygen, the uptake of oxygen, the uptake of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is going to reduce inflammation. And why? Because it reduces galactin-3, that is the promoter of inflammation. And so by mixing your oils together, you can get a greater and more harmonious outcome. Bronchial acetate. Spruce, 38%. Why? Because it's an expectorant. Bronchial and nasal inhalant. That's the sedative. And so even though spruce, pine, contains terpenes, which terpenes are phenols, and phenols are what? Stimulants. So how can you have a stimulant and a sedative at the same time? Can anyone tell me? How can you have a stimulant and a sedative at the same time? Well, all of you that are married should know that. Right, Kathy? So if you can have it in real life, why can't you have it in nature? Very simple, but it's all about the structure and it's all about the percentages of that molecule that's present. So in spruce, you got a 38%. So it has a higher level of bronchial acetate than it does of terpene phenols. And so if the body needs to relax, it'll relax. If the body needs a stimulant, then it draws from the phenol part. Isn't that fascinating? And why? It's because of the receptor site either being open or closed. And if there's a need, the receptor site will be open. If there's not a need, it will be closed. And bronchial acetate has specific receptors it goes into. Phenols for terpenes have specific receptor sites they go into. So depending on what the need of the body is will depend on which receptors are open to receive at the time you place it. So this is why it has been said again, oils can have a global effect. Yes, they can have a global effect, but they also have a very specific effect. And you can direct that specific effect if you know how to use, mix, and apply the oil. And of course, here, it's all about understanding raindrop and why it's so valuable. So we look at pine. Pine's another one, but very, very low in bronchial acetate. So if you're looking for something that's a sedative, would you choose pine? Because pine contains sesquiterpenes, but a very small percentage. Pine contains terpenes, which are phenols, at a higher percentage. So pine is going to be more specific for antiseptic, antibacterial action than you would use it, than choosing it to use as a sedative. You'd be better off to go to chamomile, ruta, valerian, any of those which are higher percentages. Cistus, 4%. But then we have to look at the whole chemistry of cistus to see how we would really use it. Okay, let's next. Camphene, Tsuga, 15%, monoterpene family. So what is Tsuga going to be beneficial for? Now, keeping in mind that the monoterpenes are the group of molecules where we find the most action as anti-cancer agents. So if we're looking at oils that may contain possible potential as an anti-cancer agent, what would we be looking at here? Tsuga, highest level of camphene. Why? Camphene is a disruptor of toxins. It's the eliminator of toxins. And we have found by putting Tsuga with frankincense, running it intravenously is very powerful in fighting prostate cancer and liver cancer. Okay, spruce, 13% camphene. Okay, camphor, another monoterpene, but it's a ketone in the monoterpene family. So this is your fragrance molecule. Sage officinalis, 25%. Blue tansy, rosemary, hyssop. Now, if you notice there, it says rosemary seniol, because there's many different subspecies of rosemary again. Rosemary seniol, officinalis, 11%. So if you're looking for an element that you want good permeation into the skin, and you don't have peppermint, then you could choose one of these 4 oils here to enhance permeation to the skin, driving the oil in. Now, why do we need to worry about driving an oil in the skin? Do you want me to tell you? Okay, next. Yes? Oh, okay. Whew. I know I'm boring you, but I didn't think it was that bad. Okay. So why do we need to drive the oils in? What do you have on the skin? An acid mantle, exactly. What do you got to get through that acid mantle? Oil. Oils that are high in camphor, oils that are high in phenols, will drive through the acid mantle of the skin and increase permeation so you can get it into the interstitial blood in the subcutaneous tissues, and hopefully get it through the fat layers in the subcutaneous fat. Very important. So rosemary is really good. Sage is good. Blue tansy. I like blue tansy as a driving agent because of the camphene, but as a monoterpene is also non-aggressive and contains very, very little, very small levels of phenols that are irritants. Carvacrol, found in oregano, 71%. Mountain savory, 26%. Very important phenol. Okay? What do they do? Receptor site cleansers, stimulants. Now you can put down here, Ecuador oregano contains 32%. Anti-inflammatory, antifungal, antibacterial, antiparasitic. And as an antiseptic, 1.5 times stronger than phenol by itself. And we're talking about synthetic phenol. Okay, carvone, another monoterpene, another ketone, found in spearmint and dill. Now the difference, With spearmint, we have an L-carvone. In dill, we have an L-carvone. A chiral pair. So we have a dextrorotary, we have a laval rotary. So does that mean it's synthetic? No. Just a different placement of the isomer on the structure. And as a result of the different placement, whether it's on the left side or the right side, depends also on the fragrance of that. So, for example, if somebody handed you an orange oil and you couldn't test it, but you smelled it and it had just a little hint of mint in it, or it had a little musky hint to the orange oil, you would know immediately that they put a synthetic limonene in it, and it was D-limonene. But when it goes through the GC analysis, it shows it as limonene. It doesn't show it whether it's L or D, it just shows it as limonene. And then they'll hand you the GC and see it has the right amount. This is grapefruit oil and it's got 89% limonene in it. You go, oh wow, this is really good lemon or grapefruit oil. But it smells like it's got a little musky note. That's because that limonene is synthetic that's put in it. That's why, again, you need to train your nose. You need to train your nose. It doesn't take too long to do that. 21 years. Okay? And then you hope that you don't have a cold on the test day. Okay, citral, found in lemongrass. Another monoterpene. A transisomer. 74% in lemongrass. Very powerful. Lemongrass has been identified and looked at also for its value in cancer treatments. Why? Because it contains L-limonene, not D. Geranium, citronella, all citrals that are very powerful as estrogen-like action in vitro. In vivo, we don't see the results, but in vitro we do. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Not all structure translates the same once it's incorporated into the human tissues. And why? Because of receptor sites, pH, multiple things. Antifungal, antibacterial, anti-ulcer. Cinnamonaldehyde, cuminaldehyde, found in cumin oil. Very powerful as an antioxidant. Okay, a lot of you have cumin in your home. You use it for cooking, for seasoning. Very, very powerful product in the home. Eucalyptol, found in Eucalyptus globulus, Polybractea, Eucalyptus radiata, Robinsara aromatica. Now, at this point here, write in Ecuador blue eucalyptus, 52%. A lot of people have allergies to eucalyptol. Now, we have produced a eucalyptus in Ecuador. It's referred to as Blanco eucalyptol. It's a white eucalyptus that grows at 10,000 feet in the Andes. It has 1.2% eucalyptol, but it's a eucalyptus. Very interesting. However, what we found with the blue gum eucalyptus, that people do not have allergies to the eucalyptol at 52 to 56%. Why? Because it's better balanced in its chemistry structure. Well, very powerful also as an antiseptic agent. Increases energy and locomotor function. Anti-inflammatory, relaxant, and analgesic. Now, depending on how or what you put it with. So if you've got sinus congestion or you got lung congestion and you're needing to open it up, there's a couple things to keep in mind. If you take eucalyptus and you're using it to open with, but you've got this heavy congestion, then you need to back up a step and ask yourself, what's causing this congestion? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from an allergen reaction? Is it coming from a sensitivity? Is it coming from fatigue? How many of you know that when you get fatigued, you notice you get a little sinus congestion? Okay, very common. Why? Because you got toxins in your body, and when you become fatigued, the toxins will go to the port of exit and create congestion. So it's very easy to get nasal congestion, and particularly if you get fatigued when you're flying and you don't sleep well. You're in a hotel, you don't sleep well, you wake up in the morning and your head's stuffy. Why? Because the toxins that have been accumulated go to the exit point and creates that congestion. And why does it go to the exit point? Because it's the closest point to the pituitary, which is overproducing galactin-3 that enhances the inflammation in the nasal cavity that's coming down from the limbic system. So you inhale eucalyptol, and what does it do? It goes in and opens that up, but you haven't corrected the process. So then you want to find an oil like frankincense or valerian or vetiver or ruta and put with it so it'll go in and relax, stop the overproduction of galactins, so you don't keep producing more mucus, more mucus, more mucus. Okay? Improves pulmonary airflow. Why? Because it's a dilator of the oxygen pathways. Very important. But another thing, if you put marjoram with it, then you'd get a natural relaxation. So as it dilates, then it doesn't constrict the moment you stop using it. And you go back to the same thing. How many have used an essential oil and it relieved it for an hour or so, and then the problem returned? Exactly, for that very reason, because you weren't addressing the problem. So folks, just know and make a note, if you're using an essential oil for a problem and it appears to modulate or change the problem but returns later, then you haven't addressed the problem. You've addressed the symptom but not the problem. And that's why you go through the process of using different oils. You know, there's a distributor many years ago that I commented about because he had this theory. He says, you know, I don't have time to learn all the things that Gary knows. So I go in the bathroom with my Aroma Complete kit in the morning. And as I'm sitting on the toilet, I open my kit, and when I put every oil on me from my kit, and the kit is on this side, then I know I've got all my oils on. And he says, and I know from that, one of those 140 some oils is going to take care of the problem. So, and he wasn't concerned about going through the process to figure out which oil it was. He just used them all. So he had all of his bases covered. So a good way to get your personal PV up too. Okay, eugenol. Eugenol found in clove oil. It's an anti-mutagenic, anti-tumoral. Clove oil is found very beneficial in fighting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and leukemia, and we've used it for both intravenously. 81% found in clove, 22% in cinnamon bark, cistus 1.5%, in ocotea it comes in at about 5%. So just put ocotea there at the question mark because I could be wrong on that exact percentage. An antioxidant protecting the liver. So again, clove oil, very important for detoxifying. It's a monoterpene. Eugenol is a monoterpene. Anti-clotting, antithrombotic. So what does that mean? It's a natural hemostat. However, this again is studying the individual action of eugenol. But if you put clove oil on a blood clot, I have not found it to do anything in dissolving a blood clot. Now why? If it says that eugenol, which is 81% of clove, is an antithrombotic agent, then why will it not dissolve a blood clot when helichrysum or cistus will? Simply because the other 19% that's in eugenol counteracts that action when applied to the human tissue. So again, you can go through and learn a lot about chemistry, but that doesn't all equate to the translation of the outcome when applied in vivo. Okay? Neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory. Now, because monoterpenes are natural anti-inflammatory agents, eugenol has been listed as an anti-inflammatory agent. But because of the high percentage of eugenol here, and even though it's a monoterpene, it could be classified as a stimulant. Anticonvulsive agent, anti-infectious, bacterial, strong inhibition against oral bacteria. And you know, of course, eugenol is also an anesthesia, topical, local anesthesia, and has been duplicated synthetically and used in the dental practice. So when you go to your dentist, you don't need to have that injection in your gum. Just rub it really good, massage it for a couple hours with clove oil before you go in the dentist, and he can go in and pull a tooth, do a root canal without anesthesia. Citronella, found in Dreniol, found in citronella, rose, and petitgrain, 20%. Anti-tumoral, inhibits pancreatic cancer. Antifungal, inhibits candida, antifungal, and antibacterial. However, in studies, we have not found geraniol to be effective in vivo as an anti-cancer agent. But in chemistry, in vitro, it has shown inhibition against different cancer lines. Limonene, and here we talked about that. D-limonene, L-limonene is monoterpene, found in grapefruit, tangerine, orange, lemon, elemi, bergamot, dill, and frankincense. Now, in frankincense, because it's a evergreen, a conifer, it's a D-limonene, and citrus, it's an L-limonene. Increases white blood cells. Yes, very effective in increasing white blood cells. Increases PFC cells in the spleen. Anti-tumoral. Inhibits liver cancer. Now, here's another part that's very interesting. 4 years ago, we did some research and study using essential oil of grapefruit and orange intravenously for cancer. Had zero effect. But yet, when we use Palo Santo, that is 61 to 67% D-limonene, we see its effect very powerful on lung cancer and prostate cancer. So what's going on here? Is there a difference between the L-limonene and D-limonene? Of course there is. And what I found, and I'm not saying this is conclusive because it is not conclusive, D-limonene has an effect against cancer. L-limonene, I have not found it in vivo to be effective against cancer, even though in vitro it does inhibit cancer cells. Linalool, monoterpene alcohol, and rosewood, neroli, lavender, petitgrain, and basil. It's an antibacterial agent, anticonvulsive, parasitic, fungal, bacterial, and an antioxidant. Now, it's also at small percentages in lavender as well, as you see at 32%. But linalool in lavender is also in companion with linolyl acetate. So it's a balancer, it's a buffer. Very powerful as a monoterpene alcohol. This is one that's a balancing agent as well. Menthol, found in peppermint, a methyl alcohol. Very, very, very important. Peppermint, piperia. Improves pulmonary airflow, antibacterial, anti-tumoral. Right? We have not seen evidence of peppermint working as an anti-tumoral agent. So make note here, this is where you can put down peppermint is what I call a personifier. It enhances skin permeation. Peppermint is best soothing for the gastrointestinal distress and fever reduction. Peppermint, we use it in the raindrop therapy as a second to the last adjunct, simply because we want to reduce inflammation caused from temperature change. And any time that we're working with neurological dysfunction, whether it's MS or any other neurological degeneration, the myelin tissue always gets inflamed. Use peppermint to take the inflammation out of the myelin. And because of methone, which is also a counterpart of the methyl in peppermint, and methone is a sesquiterpene, it's now also deregulating the pituitary gland, reducing galactans that increases inflammation, and therefore it'll drop the temperature, reduce the temperature of the nerves that might be affected and being compromised. Myristicin, nutmeg, anti-tumoral, increases galactan levels. Now this is where we have seen benefits with nutmeg oil in increasing glutathione levels in liver defense, and very, very important. How do you use it? You can take nutmeg internally, 1 to 2 drops in water or 1 drop under your tongue sublingually. Very effective for improving liver functions through the glutathione. Antifungal, anti-tumoral. Anti-tumoral, again, more specific for non-Hodgkin's type cancers. Anti-inflammatory. Now this is from the phenol family, so it's a stimulant, it's a receptor site cleanser, it's a detoxifier. Pinene and the monoterpene family. Now you have alpha and beta pinene. Valerian 61%, spruce 60%. Now these here are very, very important in the activity, again, and cleansing the body, and have been showing promise that it could have benefit against Alzheimer's activity. Why? because alpha-pinene has an affinity to the receptor sites of the brain and the brain stem in helping to modulate and regulate receptor site openings and the transferase enzyme in modulating messages between the cells. Valerian, spruce, cypress, melaleuca, frankincense, 35% pinenes, alpha pinenes in frankincense. You also have beta pinenes in frankincense. Fir, pine, black pepper, patchouli, and nutmeg. Terpenol. Terpenol, a monoterpene alcohol. Very important. Laurus nobilis, Rabansara, geranium, neroli, marjoram, melaleuca. An antioxidant, antibacterial agent. What is an antioxidant? Antioxidants are free radical scavengers. All right? They're going to go in, they're going to help round up the toxic residue in the body, they're going to attack it, break it down. And what is a free radical? It's an aggressive acid that has created a great deal of toxicity, known in the form of H+ ion. Thymol. Thyme, mountain savory, oregano, 50% thymol. The monoterpene alcohol. Again, very aggressive, 20 times stronger as an antiseptic. Anti-infectious, bacterial, strong inhibition against oral bacteria. That's why it's in your Fresh Essence mouthwash. It's in your toothpaste. Anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, liver protectant, and antibacterial. Now, as we go through this and you see the structures here of some of the molecules, and folks, so far we've talked about a tiny, tiny fraction of thousands of molecules found in essential oils, keeping in mind that one single oil contains over 800 molecules. And then when you know that, it helps you to understand why a laboratory cannot duplicate it and replicate it to its perfection. Now, backing up, let me back up on that one just a little bit. Whoops, there we go. And we look at mountain savory and oregano. These three oils work harmoniously together, and as we're doing raindrop, sometimes, particularly on children, I will use mountain savory and oregano or mountain savory and thyme rather than oregano, because oregano, you have to keep in mind that even though it shows it's only got 3% thymol, but oregano is 71% carvacrol, which is a very, very powerful phenol that can be an irritant because it's a stimulant, it's a detoxifier, it's a cleanser of receptor sites. And so when you look at the chemistry, you have to be looking at all the chemistry of the oil, not just a single molecule. Because if you looked at this and said, oh, oregano only has 3%, I can use this on a child, you're leaving out the 70% that could be very irritating to the child. So when you look at thyme and you look at mountain savory being 26% carvacrol, then you realize that you just reduced that percentage by 30%. And so now this is a better one to apply to children because children don't have the same toxicity level that we adults have, and so the receptor sites are not as plugged up, and they'll respond much quicker to a lesser amount and have a greater harmonious outcome. Functions of essential oils: antibacterial, antioxidant, anti-cancer, antifungal, antispasmodic, anti-inflammatory, immune stimulant, anti-ulcer, hormone support, antiviral, DNA repair, and tissue regeneration. On the monitor here, these photos that you're going to see are photos from MRI of my spine that were taken in August 27th of last year. The series, we had several x-rays and a CAT scan in July, and then these MRIs were done with contrast August the 27th last year. The reason why is simply because March of last year, almost a year and a half ago, I woke up one morning in Yemen and had a great deal of pain in my neck and thought it was the bed that I was sleeping in, and of course put oils on it, reduced the inflammation, reduced the pain, and I went on through the day in the activities of filming and doing research and travel. I came home and the pain persisted. So, of course, it was oil 3 or 4 times a day. It would knock it down where it was tolerable, wouldn't completely go away. It progressed on into May, and by May, I was losing strength in my right arm. By the end of May, I couldn't buckle my belt with my right hand. We went to convention in Australia, and while at the convention in Australia, it intensified the pain and the weakness to the point where I started having muscle atrophy in my forearm and my bicep. And that became very alarming because of having that experience in 1973 and knowing that I was dealing with a serious neurological dysfunction, but not knowing what it was. From the original accident in 1973, I never did sit down with the neurologist and the specialist and ever look at my scans or my reports. I wasn't into that. I didn't really know that knowing would make a difference, and so it was just a place I didn't go. And I'd never seen the condition or how bad it was. I just knew that I had my back broken in several places and had torn brachial plexus, ruptured spinal cord in 3 places, and I was paralyzed on the right side and below the waist, and spent 2 years in a wheelchair and 13 years learning to walk again. And so not until this came knocking on the door a year and a half ago did I realize that I had a condition that was very severe. So what you're looking at here are pictures of my spine as it looked last August the 27th. And after we visited with 7 different specialists, 2 in Ecuador, 5 in the United States, and consulted with 2 in Miami over the phone in my condition as they reviewed the scans that were sent to them, and was told that the only choice I had was to have surgery. So we'll go to the next one and I can explain that, but as you look at the spine pictures here, so what was happening, what was discovered is that from the original accident in 73, I had 16 fractured, crushed, broken vertebrae, and several of them in several places, and 11 ruptured discs, and 3 herniations in the spinal cord. So over the years, as the disc tried to repair, which they did to some degree, they grew scar tissue, but as I aged, that scar tissue got harder and harder until it cracked and started leaking the fluid out of the disc, and so they started collapsing again. And as a result of that, then the body went into its own protective mechanism and started growing bone spurs on the vertebra to hook the disc and try to hold the disc in between the vertebra. And those are called osteophytes. And there were 9 growing on my spine from C2 to C8, 7 which were creating major compressions. The one at number 2, which we'll see when we get them back up here, was the major culprit that was causing all the pain that was radiating down the brachial plexus into my arms, causing the atrophy simply because the circulation had been shut off, nerve impingement, so the muscle couldn't get the nutrients it needed, and so muscle atrophy. In July, the 2 of the specialists that Mary and I went to visit and to find understanding told us that I had a choice, and that was either do surgery or expect to be in the wheelchair in 6 months. Another specialist told us that I might get a year before I'd be back in the wheelchair without surgery. And the surgery was going to consist of going in and cutting off the osteophytes and putting pins in my neck. And 2 surgeons talked about 4 short pins, and 1 surgeon talked about 2 longer pins, which I would lose the mobility in my neck. I would have rotation, but I wouldn't have forward or reverse flex. Each one of the physicians told me if I didn't do the surgery that I had to stop skiing, I had to stop snowmobiling, I had to stop riding horses, and I absolutely could not joust. If I was to have any impact of any kind and one of the osteophyte at C2 broke off, it would go through the spinal sheath, and not only would I be paralyzed, a quadriplegic, but I would be dead. So they said, if you get rear-ended in a car at this point, you have a risk of death. It had grown to that point. So I waited till after our lavender days last year, and I jousted before I went to get the information from the doctor. So I kind of smiled there as he was saying no more activity, and of course he knew me, and he knew that I did this extracurricular activity and thought I was pretty crazy. And I said, I'm not crazy. What gives you that idea? As you know, when you have an extreme life, you have to do extreme things for stress reduction. And so anyway, I wasn't too sure, and I'm still not too sure today, that Mary maybe didn't pay him a little extra under the table to tell me that I shouldn't joust anymore. I have suspicion that might have happened because she was with me, but she won't confess. But anyway, in a nutshell, my life was over. It was over. Here you can see the spinal column, the spinal cord, and you can see this is the myelin sheath coming down the spinal cord here. And you can see right here at C2 where it's indented right against the center of the spinal cord. And this is the one that was impinging the circulation to my arms. And by March, the pain had moved into the left side and gone down the left side, to which on a scale 1 to 10, the pain was at 100. And oils applied several times a day to reduce the pain so I could function. But it wasn't just this one, but there was a total of 7 major compressions from C2 to C8. 9 altogether, but 7 right in that region. And so it was a multiple condition that wasn't just one single location. And of course, we're not able to see the osteophytes or the bone spurs there because the images are not clear enough. This was just showing on down the spine, which again right here, this is L2. 50% of that one is completely gone to this day. And this one here, which I believe is T5, has a hole through it where you could shove a wooden pencil right through it. From the impact, it just exploded the heart right out of the vertebra. All of these, all the way up, were busted and split and pieces completely gone. So it was a pretty ugly scenario. And of course, the specialist, they asked me, they said, well, how have you functioned all these years? And I said, quite well, thank you. By the time we returned home from convention, things took a drastic change for the worse. And Tammy was working on me almost daily to try to help keep the pain down during the day. Mary had put oils on 2 or 3 times at night. But I was at the point where I was pretty much bedridden by the time we got home from convention. And at one point, I finally succumbed to having morphine drip to shut the pain down. And it progressed very quickly. And it's kind of like when you are putting water in a bucket. You can put in a cup full, you can put in a quart, you can put in 2 quarts, and you don't notice it. Not until the water is at the very top of the bucket that you can add 1 single drop and it spills over on your feet. And that's what had happened. 38 years, these bone spurs, osteophytes they're called, had been growing, but it finally got to the point to where just 1 tiny fraction of more growth made that difference. It really started putting pressure on the spinal cord. And the answers after traveling and visiting with specialists and determining what I could do, we've decided that I would not do surgery. That I just felt anew inside that there would be an answer. And I had to hold to that knowing. Because I knew if I let anything else creep in my mind, that which I was seeking for would not come. Because, and maybe I have a wrong belief system, I don't know, but it works for me. But I had so much confidence in God that He would give me the answer. Mary sat on the bed beside me one night, and she says, "Why? Why hasn't God healed you?" And I said, "Mary, you can't go there. You can't ask why. There's a reason. And until I find the reason, it won't happen." And even the point where I said, "And maybe the reason isn't in this life." And I says, "I have come to grips that if it isn't, it's okay, because whatever God has planned for me, it's okay." And she said, "Well, what about us that get left behind?" And I said, "Just think of how much less hassle you'll have in your life." And I says, "And honey, you're taken care of financially, so you never have to worry about it." And she says, "Well, that's not what I'm concerned about." And I says, "But you'll have peace. After 15 years, you'll have peace." Well, that didn't comfort her a bit. But what I was convinced of, and I told my father this, I don't know what your purpose for me is at this point, but I will not let my sons see me in a wheelchair. Because whatever it is, that's what they will remember. I want them to remember their father as the father that took them fishing, that took him camping in the mountains, that went skiing with them, that took him snowmobiling, that did all the fun things that we do. That's the memories I wanted him left with. Nothing else. And I said, so, if it isn't meant for me to be healed of this condition at this time, then that will be the outcome. And I said, you need to know because I'm prepared for that. And it wasn't a fun conversation. It wasn't an easy conversation, but I had my mind made up. I knew what I wanted, and I would settle for nothing less. So what I do, and I've shared this before, I look at what is the very worst scenario, and I plan for the very worst scenario. And I work it out in my mind, and when I can come to grips with the very worst outcome, and I can walk all the way through it and be at peace with it, then I put it aside and go for the very best. Because folks, if you can't deal with the worst case scenario, it's going to destroy you. Because that's where you'll spend your time, is in the worst scenario. So always look at the worst and figure out how you can get through it. And this is how many have read my book, The One Gift? Thank you. I taught that principle in the book. When Shutron was telling Caleb that what is the very worst thing that can happen? The very worst thing that can happen is you die. And that is the very best outcome. Yes, those who are left behind will be sad. You will be missed. But for you, you'll be in God's presence, rejuvenated and ready to start a new assignment. So that is the very best outcome from the very worst outcome. So no matter what, you can't lose. It's win-win for you. And those who are left behind, well, they take on an attitude because they're selfish. True or false? It's human emotion. It's very real. We're selfish. We don't want to see someone progress ahead of us. If we're going to progress, we want to be the one going there first, right? So look at the worst outcome and accept it. And know that if that is what is going to happen, you're okay with it. Because once you're okay with it, then you can be at peace and let happen what needs to happen. But I had a little ace in my back pocket. And that was that I knew that God was not going to let me out of life that easy. And I told Mary, as she sat on my bed holding my hand that night, I said, honey, I know he'll give me the answer, but I have to get clear. I have to put this pain behind me, and I have to get clear in my mind so I can listen, so I can hear what it is, because there's something that he's going to teach me. And I know that as surely as I lie here in this bed. And what he's going to teach me will be for the betterment of humankind. And if I didn't go through this, then how could he teach me? Because I'm a little thick-headed. And that's why he hit me with a tree in 1973, to get my attention so I'd listen. At 2:10 a.m., and I don't know why that particular time, but he wakes me up between 2:10, 2:15, 2:20 every time he wants to talk to me. And all I can figure is that's when everybody's off the computers and the airwaves are a little more clean. And he woke me up at 2:10, and I had my notepad there on the night table, and I started writing down what he told me to do. And you know what? When God gives you direction, you don't say, "What? Well, are you sure this is going to work? Well, what if? How do I deal with the side effects?" You don't question. You just do. Because this I can tell you, if he gives you an answer, you don't need to ask questions. Because he's not going to tell you to do something that's not right. So the next morning when I shared it with the doctors, when they come up to the room to check on me, Dr. Lay, the first thing she said is, Gary, Dr. Young, no, please don't do this, please don't do this. And I says, I have no doubt, I'm going to do it. I says, just find me a doctor that will do the injections. She said, no, I won't do this. And Tamara, you were there. Did she get scared? Very scared. Valerie, you were there. So she called 2 other doctors, and they said, no, we won't do it. So I called my friend in Salt Lake. He said, Gary, has this been done before? And I said, no. He said, well, how do you know it'll work? Because I said, God told me it would. He says, well, I guess I'm as crazy as you. I'll come down and do it. And he did. 14 injections with a 3.5-inch hypodermic needle in the neck. But what did we do? What did God show me? Take my blood, 60 cc's of blood, and spin it in a centrifuge and separate the hemoglobin, the red blood cells, the albumin, and the human growth factors and the platelets. And mix the human growth factors and platelets with frankincense and inject it in my neck. Bent 2 hypodermic needles trying to get it through the scar tissue in my neck. I remember losing consciousness 3 times. How many people were holding me on the table? 4? I didn't wiggle too much, did I? She's not going to tell on me. Was it painful? There's not words in the English vocabulary to describe it. And Dr. Adelson said that he used practically all of his strength to shove those hypodermic needles through my neck because the scar tissue was so thick. After the injections were over and I turned over on my back, I was 100% pain-free within 5-6 minutes. I was laying there. Mary had taken the children to school. She came back. I was pretty excited being free of pain. She walked in. She picked up my hand and put it up on her face. And I screamed with excitement because for the first time in 38 years, I could feel the fine hair on her cheeks that I had not felt in 38 years. I never had the sensitivity from the time of the accident in my right hand. And I even said, honey, you need to shave. You can't imagine what it was like after 38 years to be able to feel again. Just simple skin, hair, little things that had never been there. I couldn't even remember what it was like. An hour and a half later, the pain started returning. So they carried me out of the treatment room upstairs. put me on the bed, and the pain kept increasing, and my neck started swelling.